All right, if you're getting ready for the CPA licensure exam, you already know that the law on obligations can be a total minefield. And today, we're zeroing in on one of the trickiest parts, alternative versus facultative obligations. Trust me, getting these two straight is a massive advantage, so let's make sure you walk away from this feeling like a pro.
So here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with why this is even a thing. Then we'll break down each type of obligation one by one. After that, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty rules of loss, the stuff that always pops up in exam problems, and we'll wrap it all up with a killer retention hack to make sure this knowledge sticks with you for the long haul.
So what's the big deal here? Well, it all comes down to this idea called a plurality of prestations. Now, a prestation is just a fancy legal term for the thing you have to do in an obligation. What you have to give, to do, or not to do. And when you have a plurality, or multiple of these things for just one single obligation, that's where it starts to get messy. And it's exactly why exam questions love this topic. Yeah, we've all memorized this classic definition from Article 1156. It seems pretty straightforward, right? It's just a legal duty. But that simple juridical necessity gets a whole lot more complicated when the person who owes the duty, the debtor, has more than one way to make good on their promise. Which one do they do? And who even gets to decide? Let's get into it. Okay, first up, let's talk about our first contender, the alternative obligation. And the one keyword I really want you to burn into your brain for this is choice. This is all about having a bunch of different options on the table right from the get-go. So, Article 1199 in the Civil Code lays it out for us. It basically says there are several different performances or prestations that are all due. But here's the kicker. The debtor only needs to completely perform one of them and the whole obligation is settled. So let's make this real. Imagine I owe you something, and I say I will give you my laptop or my phone or my tablet. In the beginning, all three of those are technically due. But the second I choose one, let's say I pick the phone, and I tell you that's my choice, the obligation totally changes. Now I just owe you the phone. And that communication piece is absolutely critical. If I don't tell you my choice, it has no legal effect. Okay, so who gets to make that choice? This is a huge, huge point for the exam. The default rule, the general rule, gives the power of choice to the debtor. And it makes sense, right? The debtor is the one who has to perform, so they're in the best position to know what's possible for them. So for your exam, always assume the debtor chooses unless the problem specifically says otherwise. Now let's switch gears and look at the other side of the coin, the facultative obligation. If choice was our keyword for alternative, then for facultative, the magic word is substitute. You can kind of think of this as an obligation that has a main act and maybe a backup plan. So Article 1206 gives us the definition, and you can see right away how different this is. Unlike an alternative obligation where a bunch of things are due, here, only one thing is actually due from the very start. But the debtor has this special power or faculty to offer something else instead. Let's go back to our gadget example. This time, the deal would sound like this. I will give you my laptop, but I may give you my tablet as a substitute. See the huge difference? My laptop is the only thing you can actually demand from me. You can never, ever force me to give you the tablet. The power to swap it out is all mine. And this brings us to probably the single biggest difference between these two. Remember how in an alternative obligation, the right to choose can be given to the creditor? Well, in a facultative obligation, that's a no-go. The right to substitute is non-negotiable. It always belongs to the debtor. The creditor can never, ever be given this power. That's a critical point you got to remember. All right, team, this is where we really earn our stripes. The rules of loss. This is where the trickiest problem-solving questions on the exam come from. So what happens if one or even all of the items get lost or destroyed? The answer totally depends on who has the choice and what kind of obligation we're talking about. Okay, let's break this table down. This is for alternative obligations where the debtor gets to choose. First row, if all the options are lost because of a fortuitous event, like a massive flood destroys everything, the obligation is just extinguished. It's nobody's fault. But look at that second row. What if all the items are lost because the debtor misstep? Well, now they're liable. They have to pay the value of the last item that disappeared, plus damages. And the third row, if just some of the things are lost, it doesn't even matter why. The debtor just has to deliver from what's left. Simple as that. Now, let's see how the whole game changes when the creditor has the power to choose. This is where it gets interesting. First row, if one item is lost by a random act of God, no big deal. The creditor just chooses from what's left.
But that second row, if an item is lost because of the debtor's fault, the creditor gets options. They can either pick one of the items that are still there, or they can demand the cash value of the one that was lost, plus damages. And finally, if the debtor's fault causes everything to be lost, the creditor gets to pick the price of any of the original items and demand that amount, plus damages. The power really swings to the creditor here.
This table looks like a lot, but it's actually super logical once you get it. For facultative obligations, it's all about timing. Let's look at what happens before the debtor makes the substitution. If the main thing, the principal thing, is lost by a fortuitous event, boom, the obligation is gone. It's over. But if only the substitute is lost, nothing happens. The debtor still has to deliver the main thing. Now, what about after the substitution is made? Well, if the original item is lost, who cares? The obligation is now to deliver the substitute. But if the substitute itself is lost after it's been chosen, that extinguishes the obligation because it basically became the new principal thing. Okay, we've gone through all the definitions and the super tricky rules. So now let's boil all of this down into a simple, powerful way that you can actually remember under the pressure of the LECPA. This is the part you'll want to save.
Let's look at this showdown side by side. Alternative obligations start with several things being due. Facultative, it starts with just one. In an alternative obligation, that right of choice can sometimes be given to the creditor, but in a facultative one, that right to substitute is always with the debtor. Seeing them like this makes it so much easier to tell them apart in a flash.
Seriously, if you remember nothing else, remember this slide. Go ahead and take a mental screenshot. Number 1, how many prestations? 2, who has the power? And 3, that key rule of loss for facultative obligations. This is your ultimate cheat sheet for any multiple choice question on this topic.
All right, time to put what you've learned to the test. Look at this sentence and fill in those blanks. I'll give you a second to think. The correct answer is B. The loss of the principal object before substitution is what extinguishes a facultative obligation, assuming it's a fortuitous event. Hey, if you got that right, you have absolutely locked in the most important rule. Keep reviewing these ideas and you are going to be ready for the exam.